your reporting is as vivid as any camera could deliver to us of what's happening there. And your reporting begins in a hospital and returns to hospitals, but it covers all of life and death in Ukraine in these 2 weeks. What else have you seen that gives you some sense of where we might be going?
Thank you, Lawrence, for the generous introduction. Happy to be with you tonight. I had got a sense of great tragedy and loss that's unmistakable and very visceral, exemplified, for example, in that scene that you read from Akhmedut Children's Hospital in Kiev, where young victims of the conflict, like that young boy Semyon, are being brought, as well as all these other children, hundreds of children who have been in the hospital waiting for care, waiting for chemotherapy, for bone marrow transplants, who are now living in dank basements underneath the hospital to hide out from nightly air raids, or being, in the best case, one might say, being brought out of the hospital by bus to Poland for treatment in that scene that you mentioned. So there is an unmistakable sense of really visceral suffering and tragedy, but there's also a sense of incredible solidarity and strength and will of resolve. I was really struck by the degree to which this invasion has really galvanized Ukrainian society. And in so, it's really gone against the initial expectations, or really the one of the big wagers that Putin made in launching this invasion. He assumed not only would Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky flee at the first sight of trouble, at the first bullet, he also assumed that Ukrainian society, rather than coming together, would also dissipate, give up. It wouldn't find resolve, or it wouldn't unify around the idea of Ukrainian state, an idea that Putin himself seems never really to have believed in. But what we've seen instead are people coming together in extraordinary ways, whether it's tens of thousands of people joining the so-called territorial defense forces. These are local neighborhood military units full of volunteers, people who just weeks ago worked in cafes as IT professionals. One man I met at the Akhmedut Children's Hospital, he was waving goodbye to his son with leukemia and his wife. They were being taken to Poland on this bus. He stayed in Kiev because he wanted to join the territorial defense forces to defend his capital. He used to work in agriculture manufacturing, or in the manufacturing of equipment for agricultural uses, and now he is in Kiev defending the capital in these territorial defense forces. I also have seen lots of people volunteering in different ways. A cafe owner, a place I knew from before the war in Kiev, a city I've been to many times and enjoyed as a really vibrant European capital. Of course, very different there now, but one place that I had been to before and liked, a cafe in the center of town. The owner has turned it into a kind of nonprofit volunteer production space for thousands of meals, up to 10,000 a day, going to those territorial defense forces, medics, and other people in the capital. So the strength and will and resolve of the Ukrainian people has been as striking to me as the great tragedy being inflicted upon them.
You write in the piece, it appeared that only one of two things could make it through this war: Putin's presidency or Ukrainian statehood. Please expand on that.
Sure. Well, in launching this war, Putin has taken an extraordinary gamble and really broken, in some senses, from character. This is a different Putin. This Putin before was certainly happy to reap whatever tactical gains he could, especially vis-a-vis the West, and was someone who wasn't afraid to make bold unexpected moves, like, for example, the annexation of Crimea. But what we're seeing with this invasion is Putin taking a whole new other level of risk, staking his country's economy, which has suffered immensely. Your previous guests have spoken about that, the degree to which sanctions are and will continue to take a real bite out of the Russian economy, and in so doing, undermining Putin's whole previous narrative of legitimacy. Up until just a few weeks ago, much of Putin's narrative of why his own rule made sense for Russia and continued rule made sense for Russia was in contrast, for example, to the turbulence and deprivation of the 1990s. That's a common motif in how Putin and his political spin doctors have explained the need for Putin's continued rule. He is the source of stability rather than the chaos that preceded him. That's the narrative that he has used. But now Putin has introduced a great deal of chaos himself into the Russian political system and certainly into the Russian economy. And having made this wager, he needs to emerge from this war with something that he can credibly present as a victory. And he has raised the stakes so far and so greatly with this invasion, with not at all a limited invasion, not at all a limited incursion with limited aims. This is really about, at least began 3 weeks ago, about regime change effectively in Ukraine. And that is the goal that Putin put before himself and the Russian military with this operation. And having seen such a high cost for this war, Putin, as I've said, needs to come out of it with something he can credibly present as a victory. And on the other side, that victory, as Putin has outlined it, or at least set out in embarking on this invasion, is effectively the limitation, if not elimination, of Ukrainian sovereignty as we've seen it so far. What Russia is asking for here, and Putin may have backed away from the regime change aspect as the military ran into great difficulty in encircling and capturing Kiev. Russia may be softening its demand to see the political leadership, including Zelensky, replaced. But nonetheless, what it continues to ask for are things that would severely limit, if not remove, Ukrainian sovereignty. Things like demilitarization, guarantees of not joining NATO and other security blocs, not joining the EU. The NATO question, for example, is enshrined in Ukraine's constitution. There's a constitutional amendment that calls on Ukraine to move toward joining NATO. So backing away from that wouldn't just be kind of a political gesture, a political decision on the part of Zelensky, but would require the country to reject its own constitution. So there are real costs for Ukraine there as well.